Dan, what's the shot clock on the window for that we have to have the elections, the runoff? Do we know? I forget the name.
But I'm not sure.
Sorry. What's the window in which we have to conduct the election for the runoff?
It's the first Tuesday in June, so it works out to be about a month.
And was it 45-day requirement? 30-day,
45.
45-day requirement, right?
All right, guys, it looks like we are streaming live on Facebook. Thumbs up for our panelists. Ready to go? Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. My name is Brandy Michaud. I am the engagement specialist in the clerk and recorder's office. And today, or actually tonight, we'll be giving you guys an overview of the charter review process along the lines of the municipal election and how we administer it. So we'll be talking about the issues, again, an overview, what some of the resolutions are, and what we go from there and how we move from there. So we'll kick it off and start with an introduction from Clerk Paul Lopez.
Thank you, Brandy, and thank you everybody for joining us this evening. Hopefully you are in a warm spot out away from the snow that's going to come. We're here in Denver, and it is, we just had fall, spring, and second winter, I think is the name of the season now. Listen, I wanted to first acknowledge Brandy and then, so thank you so much. And thank you panelists for being on. Thank you, Councilman Flynn, for not only just serving on the charter committee, but being an active participant here too, as well as our council president, Stacy Gilmore. So the reason why we have this charter review committee is because in 2019, during the municipal election, Denver has encountered a bit of a conundrum, and that is that the charter that we are under, the city constitution, so to speak, is a little bit antiquated when it comes to elections. There's a little conflict between our charter and then the modernization of elections that's governed by state law. We've been cutting it really close. And in 2019, we actually cut it real close to where, one, we can almost be in violation of state law in terms of when we run the election. And also what happens is because of the city's runoff during our city elections, it gives us a really, really tight turnaround in which to understand who's going to be in the runoff, designing those ballots, making sure everything is solid, making sure things are accurate, that there's no typos, and being able to get that to our vendor who prints those ballots, sends them out to voters, and then voters send them back or drop it off in a Dropbox or come in person in time for the runoff election day. Now, our model is the same model in every single election. You have 3 ways to vote. 1 is in person, 2 is by mail, and then 3 is by Dropbox. So, we expect that in 2023, we will hopefully have more participation, but at that point, we would want people to already know that by muscle memory and continue to participate. However, it does create a conflict. If we continue on the path that we are on and not addressing the iceberg that we are almost in a near miss with state law and our charter, and that whole timing issue I spoke of, if we get anywhere close to doing that, we're going to be in some big trouble in terms of violation in terms of state law. The other thing is that by not doing anything, we are potentially creating a disparity and disenfranchising voters who are abroad, what we call UOCAVA voters. So those are voters who are military and overseas voters. We send them those ballots, they send them back. If we don't address this, we are creating 2 different systems in which to vote. And it does not benefit those folks who are abroad. They will have less time to be able to consider what's on their ballot and study their ballot, and a much tighter window for them to turn around and send those ballots back to us. And it also kind of goes against what our philosophy is here at Denver Elections, and that's we want to make sure that voting is easy for folks and that you have plenty of time to consider those choices, study what's on your ballot, and then turn it in. So that's the problem that we encounter. What it's going to take is a charter change. We can't just simply, pass this through an ordinance through council or just create rules for us to be able to, new rules for us to be able to use. It has to go through charter. So as we were reviewing the charter and looking at what changes to the charter that need to take place, obviously the shortest, most simple answer is that we would just extend the date to an earlier date. So instead of a May election and a June runoff, you would probably potentially have an April election and a June runoff. So you have this time for us to be able to conduct the election and make sure that folks have the time to be able to vote and to cast their ballots and vote and participate in those municipal elections. But since we are looking at changing the charter, there are a lot of ways to solve this problem. One of it, like I said, is changing the time frame. The other is considering our philosophy of elections. For the longest time, Denver has been and we continue to be a county and an entity that values majority rules. So if you have 50% plus one vote, you are the winner, you win the majority, and that is how we usually run our elections. The other way to look at it is plurality. There's some few other cities and counties that do this. One of them is Aurora, where you don't need to have the majority of votes to win. You just need to have the most out of whoever's in your race. So you could potentially win with less than a majority of votes. So that's one of the things that we always consider, what we're considering that's on the table for discussion, that's been on the table for discussion. The other is the method, the model of which we are voting, right? There are other models that would address this. Ranked choice voting, for instance. If we went to a ranked choice voting model, that would be an instant runoff. So you wouldn't have to have the runoff election. You would just have one election, and you would rank as voters, we would rank our choices, and then that's tabulated at the end. And the second place, the second most favorite candidate, that's how it would basically tabulate, right? So it would rank your choices, and based off of your choices, it would tabulate. The other is approval voting, which essentially would give voters the opportunity to vote for however many they want per race. And, you just pick more than one. And then that would be tabulated, and we would determine the winner there too. So, and that also would potentially decrease the need for a runoff. However, it is typical that a runoff could exist in that scenario as well too. So we've explored these different kind of models, these different conversations between ranked choice, between moving the dates, between looking at it, even perhaps moving the election to November to pair up with the November election cycle. Now, mind you that this is strictly for municipal elections. We're not talking about school board. We're not talking about presidential general cycles or anything like that. This is something that we need to address as Denver for our municipal. So the charter process goes through council. Ultimately, this is a vote of council and gets placed on the ballot and becomes a vote of the people. The shot clock for that is, I think, the last week of August in terms of the timing to put something on the ballot. And in order for us to be able to do that, we had this whole year of gathering public input and having these meetings so that we can make sure that we have the right recommendations and the right input for a decision like this. Unfortunately, the pandemic has sent us into virtual mode, or else we'd be having this in person. The other thing that we have to, that's important to consider is that as we created this committee, we wanted to make sure it was reflective of our county government and that it was inclusive as well too. So what we did is we invited city council to invite 2 appointees President Stacy Gilmore, who sits on the Charter Committee, and Councilman Flynn, who sits on the committee as well too. We asked the mayor to appoint one, which is Alan Salazar, and as the clerk, I appointed four. Professor Michael Cummings from the University of Colorado at Denver, Mark Gruskin, who is a well-respected elections expert and attorney in our community, Gina Ozels, who comes from Color, and she's a community appointee. And then also I invited our former clerk and recorder, the Honorable Stephanie O'Malley, to sit on this committee because she is the first elected and independent clerk and recorder that the city has had. And a lot of the modernization and a lot of the movement between the change between us having an elections commission to an elections division has been on her watch. So a lot of that heavy movement happened during her tenure. So that's the committee. What's going to happen is now after so many meetings that we've had and considering all these different models and having these dialogues, we wanted to have a little town hall about what some of the things and thoughts that folks on the committee have had, engage with the public, answer questions. What we'd like to do, what I would expect from this committee is to give me a series of recommendations of how to proceed. We will consider those recommendations, and I would also consider input from the public on how we move forward. Now, this is a partnership with City Council. I can't just put something on the ballot and pass my own laws. And you can change that. No, I'm just kidding. I knew I would get Kevin Flynn riled up on that one. As a former
I can't even do that.
So it does take a vote of City Council. So we're working in partnership to do that with the legislative branch. So that's what it looks like. Again, hopefully we get something on the November ballot so that the next time the municipal comes in 2023, we'll have this addressed and we'll make sure that we have that those questions and those hurdles conquered and those questions answered.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Clerk. And just a quick housekeeping before we jump in any further. So everybody knows that this is being streamed live on Facebook, and then we will create a link for our YouTube page for this recording to be housed on. And we'll make sure that we have that available to folks as well. Please be sure to ask questions within our QA section. I see some questions coming in, and we'll make sure we ask those questions or get those questions answered at the end as well. And I want to go ahead and shoot it over to Councilman Flynn to talk about experience on the committee, kind of City Council's role. And then we'll go into the PowerPoint presentation by Dan Bokic, and we will then, like I said, be able to answer some of those questions as well. So Councilman Flynn, it's all yours.
Thank you, Brandy, and thank you, Clerk Lopez. And I'm looking forward to Dan's presentation. The clerk knows the system very well. He served 12 years on the council, and takes 7 people to put something on the ballot. If it's a charter change, only 7. And I think, Paul, you served 12 years, right? I think you were first elected when you were 10, considering how young you look, right?
17 years old now, man.
I also want to recognize, I saw in the attendees a former clerk and recorder, Rosemary Rodriguez, in the attendees list. So hi, Rosemary, and welcome. We look forward to your input as well. We have been meeting since the late summer. I think it was August was our first meeting. We went into hiatus during election season because obviously the clerk and his staff were quite busy handling, I think, a very high, I don't know if it was a record turnout, but very high turnout. Handled very well, by the way. High marks for how the elections division handled the November election. Thank you. We have been looking at the problems. We've been trying to identify all the problems, and we have not only looked at solutions to those problems, but whether we should even go beyond that to different voting systems. We've looked at them from a pretty high level. We've asked for a lot of data before we make a recommendation, but I think it's fair to say, Clerk Lopez, and to the folks in the audience, that we've tried to scan the entire universe of possibilities for how we can proceed with the next municipal election. I want to talk just a little bit about the next steps after this, after there is a recommendation. Clerk, council, as Clerk Lopez mentioned, takes up issues to put on the ballot and must make a final vote by late August in order to make the November ballot. This November, I think we have the DPS, we have school board races. I'm not sure if there's anything else scheduled for the ballot, if there's any statewide or if there are any citywide issues that would be on the ballot, but that would be the time to do it. So we have the off year 2021 election to work with. So we're looking at a deadline for final passage of whatever might go on the ballot to be late August. And certainly we'll keep everybody here plugged into that process. With that, Brandy, thank you for inviting us, and I look forward to Dan's presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Councilman Flynn. And Dan, whenever you are ready, go ahead.
All right, thank you. I'm just gonna hope I can share my screen correctly and do that right now. Okay, you all can see that PowerPoint?
Yes.
Beautiful. Well, thank you very much for having me. As Brandy said, my name is Dan Bolkash. I'm the Policy and Compliance Administrator here for the Clerk and Recorder's Office. And we've been taking on this issue for actually quite a while. Really, when we went through the 2019 election, all the elections folks looked at each other and said, we can't do this again. And then Paul came on board as our clerk in July of 2019. And when we got through the November coordinated, we really kind of brought him up to speed as to the issue we were having. And then of course we had the pandemic. So we started doing this process virtually in 2020 instead of an in-person process. But I'm just going to begin this presentation by teeing up the problem again and really just reiterating what Clerk Lopez already said. We have these two charter provisions in our home rule charter that are essentially conflicting with each other. We have one charter provision that tells us to follow state election law. And in 2013, state election law made it automatic that we mail ballots to military and overseas voters 45 days before election day, and that we mail ballots to domestic voters about 3 weeks before election day, so 22 to 18 days. And what that really did is that prolonged all of the front end work that we have to do for an election. So it takes us a really long time to get ready for an election, to make sure that we have the ballot content, everything's prepped, translated, double checked, triple checked, and then we're ready to get those printed and mailed out in the mail. Now we have this other charter provision that's been on the books for a little while now, and that also instructs us in our municipal elections to conduct our runoff about 1 month after the general municipal. So we have to do the general municipal in May and the runoff in June. That conflicts, so that's about 1 month. That conflicts with, as you can see, the 45 days with military and overseas voters. And it even puts us in a really bad time crunch, even with our domestic mail ballots, because there's still work to be done after election day too. It's not like we just hit election day and it's all over. So we are aiming to fix this timeline conflict that we have in our charter. And of course, it's going to take a charter amendment to do that. So I've attempted to mock up just this really quick and simple timeline or calendar of what this looked like in 2019 for us. So the dot in the middle of your screen has a black outline. That's election day. That's municipal election day. It was May 7th. If we were following, and we were for this one, the normal election timeline to administer an election, military and overseas ballots had to go out on March 23rd. So it's a pretty big runway before actual election day. And then you see April 15th, tax day, we started mailing ballots to the domestic voters. And then we had our vote centers open on April 29th. But as I said before, there's actually a lot of work that happens after election day too. So even though May 7th was our municipal election day, there was a cure deadline of May 15th. So if you had a discrepant signature, if you forgot to sign the back of your ballot, something like that, we give you another week to communicate with you and try to get you to cure that before your ballot continues on in the counting process. Now, 2 days after that, May 17th, that was actually the last day to ask for a recount. So someone still, if you're an interested party under state law, could ask for a recount as well. So there's still a lot of time, as you can see, after the election that we're still doing things to audit, certify the results, and make sure that we got it right. What I've now done is added in red dots, which signify the normal timeline for the runoff election. So We have these two elections and they are very clearly conflicting with each other if we were going to follow the normal timeline. The first red dot that you see actually is April 20th. So if we were mailing ballots to military and overseas voters for the runoff election under that normal 45-day deadline, we theoretically, well, we would have mailed them before we even knew who was supposed to be on the ballot, right? That deadline came before the first election day. And then the deadline to mail ballots to domestic voters would have hit even before signature cures. So if we had a really close election, then, and we were waiting on the cures to see who should be the top two, that would have thrown us off as well. So we have these two elections that are conflicting with each other when we're following the normal election timeline. What we did in 2019 in order to mitigate some of this is we adopted some emergency rules under our rulemaking authority to just say, we're going to get to this as quickly as we can, and we're going to do the best that we can. We wanted to give people a little bit of notice, obviously, that we're aware of the conflict and we're doing everything possible to get those ballots out as quickly as possible. We also adopted some emergency rules related to something, a company called Votes. We partnered with them to do a pilot program to let military and overseas voters cast their ballots through blockchain technology. That helped mitigate this problem with the timeline with military and overseas voters. We were lucky enough that a third party covered the costs for that, so it didn't actually cost the city anything to do that pilot program. But that was a one-time deal. I mean, we were very lucky that someone picked up the cost at that point. I don't think we can really rely on philanthropy for the entire time. This also raises a few other problems that we wanted to bring to this committee's attention. Now that we're cracking open a charter, it makes sense for us to evaluate everything in our eyes instead of just doing something and then maybe 2 years later realizing we made a mistake or we were supposed to do something else. So we wanted to take a holistic view, and one of the first bullet you see here is just timelines in the charter. We don't really have charter provisions that just seem to contemplate mail ballot elections right now. These charter provisions have been on the books since we conducted polling place elections and since we required people to just show up on one day or only a couple days before election day and cast their ballot. The other thing that we wanted the committee to consider is the cost. In 2019, it cost us about $1 million to conduct the general municipal and just under $1 million to conduct the runoff. Now, obviously, that's because we had a citywide runoff with the mayor and with the clerk and recorder. If it were a smaller runoff, maybe say just for a district council member or something like that, it wouldn't have cost us as much, but it was a citywide, so essentially we ran a second citywide election. So that's why that cost is the same. And we also wanted to raise the issue of just participation and awareness. Looking at the numbers since 2000, 4 out of the 5 runoff elections saw a dip in voter participation compared to the general municipal. In 2019, what that looked like is actually 22,000 fewer voters cast a ballot in the runoff compared to the first election. Also, the clerk, as you know, he was out there with his election, he heard a lot of voters kind of raised the question to him, you know, well, what election are you talking about? Elections are in November. Elections are in November. And so we have kind of this anecdotal evidence as well that people are really expecting to have their elections in November instead of in the spring. So we wanted to bring that awareness as well. So the committee, just to repeat what the clerk said, we have 7 members on this committee. The first is Professor Michael Cummings, who is a professor from the University of Colorado, Denver. And obviously we have Councilman Flynn and Council President Stacey Gilmore. Mark Gruskin, who is a pretty well-known election attorney, both in Denver and throughout the state of Colorado. Stephanie O'Malley, who was the first elected clerk and recorder when we moved to the elected clerk and recorder in 2006 or 7. And then Jenna Ozels, who is the field director over at Calora, and Mr. Alan Salazar, who is the chief of staff for the mayor. We actually chose Jenna from a community input process. So we solicited applications from the community. Community members applied to be on this, and we chose her at the end of the day. So we have put the possible solutions in front of this committee to evaluate kind of holistically and to choose a path forward at the end of this process. The solutions we have so far and right now is to pursue first past the post voting. So that would contemplate eliminating the runoff altogether. Whether to pursue ranked choice voting, again, contemplating eliminating the runoff and getting that determination of voter intent in one election instead of two. Whether to pursue approval voting. This is something that could be molded to a couple different ways. It could eliminate the runoff, but it also could be applied in a formula of election one, election two. The fourth bullet here is just simply provide more time in between the two elections. So the nice, neat calendar is typically ballot content is certified to us for an election about 60 days before election day. So the nice and neat way would be you conduct election one, you certify it, you audit, you canvass it, and then you certify the ballot content about 60 days before. And then in connection with any of these, whether to change the dates of the election. This is really the option of whether to move to November or coordinate with that election that is always going on in November as well. So this is what the committee schedule has looked like. We started this process actually on August 20th, and that was a pretty good introduction. And then we really just framed the issue in this meeting of what it looks like, what we're encountering, and why we're bringing this committee together. We also got a really great demonstration from the state demographer that presented to the committee and kind of just explained, where Denver has been and what the population is going to look like of Denver in the next few years and what's anticipated. The next meeting, we had a really probably the election mail expert present to the committee to explain what it looks like now to tie your elections to the United States Postal Service. So obviously now that we're automatically mailing ballots to everybody, we've tied our wagon to the USPS. And so she was really able to give us a good insight as to what it looks like in that organization and what it looks like to them to conduct elections. And then in December, we just talked about what it looks or what it could look like to move to November. This would obviously impact a lot of charter amendments, a lot of city procedures if this were to happen. January 7th, we had 2 meetings for alternative vote methods, the first being ranked choice voting, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And the second meeting was approval voting. Again, I'll get to that in the next slide. The meeting that we just had to wrap up a lot of this info gathering, or really kind of the high level overview of things, was first past the post. So that was just contemplating if we get rid of the runoff and run our elections like every other election you're used to, which is just you vote for one person and whoever gets the most votes wins. The increased time in between the 2 elections and looking at that calendar and discussion amongst the committee members. We are hoping to have a charter amendment on the ballot in front of you, the voters, by November 2021. And we think that timeline is also very important because that gives us, if voters approve a change to the election model, that gives us enough time as an office to communicate the change to voters. For as much as we would love to say 100% of our voters are going to be aware of this as soon as we vote on it, we really need to spend the next year and a half to say, okay, look, when you vote in May or 2023 or whatever in 2023 for your municipal election, it's going to look different than last time, and that'll give us enough time to communicate the change, hopefully. So I'll give a brief overview of the solutions. The first I have up here is ranked choice voting. This is a method of voting where you rank your candidates in order of preference. There are multiple ways to design the ballot in order to achieve that. But the simplest way is almost like a Scantron sheet or something we're used to from elementary school, where you kind of put, I like this person first, this person second, this person third, so on and so on. Now we could design it where you either rank 3, 4, 5 people, or you rank as many options as there are candidates. There are a lot of ways to design that ballot, talk about instructions, but those are details we could get to later if the committee chose this path. This would allow us to determine who received a majority of support in one election instead of 2, theoretically. So we would tabulate the votes. If someone doesn't get 50% right away, the candidate with the lowest amount of votes drops out, and the people who voted for that candidate, their second choices are then going to get reallocated. And we essentially repeat that process until someone gets 50% of the vote. The next option we have here is approval voting. This is pretty simple. It's just voting for everyone that you like, and you don't have to rank them or put them in any sort of order. It's just what we call in the industry of overvoting. There's all these bubbles next to people's names. You just get to fill in the bubble next to everyone that you like. And at the end of the day, whoever gets the most votes wins. Or it could be tailored so that the top 2 or something like that go to a runoff. But the whole idea behind approval is that you don't have to choose just one person. You remove the spoiler effect of having to split votes in between people that maybe have the same platform, and you just vote for everyone that you like. And then there's first past the post voting. This is what you're used to seeing in your federal and state elections. We felt it was pretty disingenuous to put it forward to the committee, ranked choice and approval, and not bring this option up too, even though some might consider it kind of like a step back. But it's just voting for one candidate, and at the end of the day, whoever receives the most votes wins. Obviously, with our municipal elections, what we're used to seeing is quite a few candidates in our races. And now that the Fair Elections Fund exists and public matching of certain contributions exists, we expect to see even more candidates in our races. So with first past the post, you could see something like someone getting elected into office with maybe 20% by the time everything is split out. Why we're talking about them, just so kind of to validate that we're not crazy. It's not like we're just making this up out of thin air. Part of what we've contemplated is if you could get rid of the conflict by just eliminating the second election. And there's actually been quite a bit of momentum lately about this. And so we wanted to recognize that there is momentum. And if we're going to crack open the charter, at least we should be contemplating these things before putting forth a solution. So Title I, which is our state election code, already permits municipalities to use ranked choice voting if they're going to conduct their own election. There's actually some legislation right now in the General Assembly to change that up a little bit, where a municipality could opt into ranked choice voting and then the county must conduct it for them. So there's some legislation going through even now to expand that authority a little bit. 2017 was the most recent approval voting legislation that we saw at the state level. So there were some advocates who were trying to make it, I think, special districts or school districts, something other than counties, that were to basically let them opt into using approval voting as well. We actually saw a ranked choice voting initiative filed with City Council and the City Attorney's Office back in 2018. They never circulated, but they kicked that process off. We actually expect to see even more initiatives, quite honestly, from people trying to go down this path of changing how we vote. Approval voting actually became a minor party in Colorado in 2019, and they're up to 3,500 members statewide. And in 2020, the city of Boulder actually just approved ranked choice voting for their mayor. So they're going to be using that in their next municipal elections. They're figuring out how to do that with their county right now. Right now, I believe it's just the town of Telluride, city of Telluride and Basalt are the only two jurisdictions at the moment using ranked choice voting, I believe. Approval voting also, I mean, there's been momentum on both of these throughout the nation, but approval voting, they actually just started in Fargo, North Dakota, and St. Louis, Missouri is the big city that just started moving over to approval voting. They have active campaigns in quite a few cities, including and the state of Utah, and they are starting more and more chapters. They have 130 chapter requests across the nation. RCV also has momentum, and probably more momentum a little bit than approval, or they just have a longer runway of doing this. But 18 cities in the state of Maine, the state of Alaska just adopted it as well in November, and various states use it to accommodate the military and overseas problem that we're encountering. So Mississippi, Georgia, some of those southern states. So our whole goal with this was to deliberate these things now instead of being forced to the table and being forced to react to an initiative. The other options, just as I said before, we could coordinate with the pre-existing November election. There will always be a November election for us because of school board and ballot measures at the state level and ballot measures at the city level. Voters are aware of November elections. We could save $2 million theoretically because we would be eliminating both of those elections, both the first election and the second one. And the big thing to remember, though, is if we move to November, we actually cannot conduct a runoff afterwards. The reason for that is because our municipal election year is always before a presidential election year. And we now have the presidential primary. We don't actually know when the presidential primary is going to be until a few months beforehand because the governor gets to set that date. It's not something set in state law like every other election date. So we would have another problem in that we would be conducting 3 elections at the same time instead of 2 if we kept the runoff then moved to November. And then, of course, we could just add more time. It would give us the normal calendar that we're used to as election administrators, but there would be no cost savings. Next is just community engagement. I'll actually leave that up to Brandy and Danielle. I don't want to steal any of their thunder, but we are obviously trying to be as inclusive as possible before we do this. We don't want to do this in a vacuum. So I'll be on and I can help answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Dan. Hey, can I use your last slide there, Dan?
Yeah.
Thank you.
There you go.
Appreciate it. So as Dan alluded to, the 2021 election would be a great election to put this information on, since it isn't, the anomaly that we all endured for 2020. And also with the hope that we would have enough time to do engagement, outreach, and education to community folks for it to actually be implemented in 2023, which is also a very big election for Denver. And so as far as our engagement, and I want to thank Celia, who is our manager, and Danielle, who's also my colleague, a part of the engagement team. So we've been doing public comment for the last month or so, and we have been able to partner with folks like DPS, our RNOs, smaller community groups to get comments from folks, and even our libraries as well. We did a huge survey. We're actually in the process of doing this. We are doing a survey, excuse me, and we've done it with folks in our library as well. We've also done a wide-reaching social media and email contact through our election advisory committee, folks from our RNOs, and also folks that are part of the charter review committee as well. We've done presentations, like I said, small to large presentations to community groups and also advocacy groups, our party leaders as well. And we're also using our committee to solicit feedback from community members as well. And so our hope is that after this presentation, that you will not only do our survey, but also get the survey out to your neighbors and other Denverites that you think may be interested in this process. We have a huge goal of trying to get those comments as soon as possible. So we need as many diverse voices that we can get to be included in this overall process. And so with that, I think we are ready for Q&A. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. So with the help of my engagement and comms team, we're going to go kind of bounce through our chat, our Q&A, and we may also have some questions through our Facebook Live coming through. So let's see here. One of our first questions is from Brian. Will one decision be made? Actually, I'm sorry, I had a question before that. And Clerk, Dan, or Councilman Flynn, whoever feels free to jump in and answer these questions, please do. So first question, charter change means what? So that voters understand what is the process, if you will.
Clerk, if you don't mind, if I'll take first crack at that. The city charter is something that we've had since 1904. It's basically the city of Denver's constitution under home rule under Title 20 of the state constitution that established Denver as a separate city and county consolidated. It's been changed numerous times over the years. It's basically how we operate and how we run what we call our strong mayor system of government. It's been changed frequently over the years. It requires a majority of voters to approve changes that are put to them by the city council or by the right of initiative. Clerk, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
You're muted, Clerk.
The phrase of 2020 in the pandemic. You're muted.
That's right.
You're muted and stay back, man.
I wish I had that button when I was raising teenagers.
Another story later for you. The charter is something that, so you have rules in the city and county that departments can make on their own. You have ordinances that the council can, initiate and vote on, and then become Denver Revised Municipal Code, which is a set of laws. But then, of course, there's the charter, and the charter is our governing document, right? And with the charter, council, there's two ways to get on the charter. One is that, council can create a bill and vote on the bill and have that placed on the charter, and the voters either approve or reject the question on the ballot, on the charter, on the ballot. So the other is initiative, right? Where an initiated ordinance, effort by the people through a certain threshold of signatures can also have something placed on the charter as well too. So those are basically the two entry points. For this purpose, being that I hold an office that isn't on the legislative branch, the clerk has the authority and the distinction by charter to run the elections, right? And to make sure that we have the adequate resources to be able to do it. And so we're working in partnership with the legislative branch to address some of the problems that you see that we identified from the beginning. So when we talk about charter change, that's what it is. Anything out of here the decisions that we're going to create is going to come to a vote of the people, hopefully in November 2021.
Thanks so much, Councilman Flynn and Clerk Lopez. Another question here, kind of in regards to the ballot here. Will one decision be made for a vote on the ballot, or could multiple options go to the ballot?
There have been instances when, I'm trying to think back, in 1974 on the statewide ballot, voters were asked to amend the state constitution to prevent Denver from annexing, basically. The Poundstone Amendment and the Boundary Control Commission Amendment, both of them won. So it creates sort of a hodgepodge of regulations if we were to put more than one approach on the ballot. I would suggest that we come up with only one approach. Otherwise, I believe the practice would be whatever achieved the most positive votes would be the one that would win the day. I would have to really get some legal advice on that to be certain. But in the case of the state constitution, we now have both Poundstone, which prohibits counties from changing their boundaries without a vote of the people in the other county, and the Boundary Control Commission, which is Denver and the 3 surrounding counties that make boundary adjustments. So both of them had to be used, for instance, in the only major annexation that took place after the adoption of that, and that was the Denver Airport annexation in 1988 and 89. So I think it'd be pretty messy, Brian, if we had to if we put more than one option on the table. I would suggest we just go with one. Paul, do you have any other advice on that?
Folks are certain of the democratic process, and it's always messy, right? And you can have competing ordinances through council to get put on the ballot. You can have competing ordinances and initiatives that would go both. And typically, being a former councilman and having served with Councilman Flynn, anytime we had something like that, we would meet and confer and make sure that we did as much as possible to reconcile competing or almost parallel initiatives, turn it into one, and then go forward there. At the end of the day, remember that by charter, the council can amend or also repeal initiated ordinances. It's very rare. But they, if some things just don't mesh up well with the charter legally, and there are some legal issues with implementation and things like that, because it just happens, right? Democracies and policymaking is a messy deal. Those can be rectified. I know that there was some issues with some past initiatives that needed to be fine-tuned by the council. One of them being a lot of the things that are on the charter regarding marijuana, right? Green roofs, things like that. So, yeah. Dan, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add, or should we move on to the next question, Brandon?
I would just say quickly, I guess that was the point of really this group and this discussion was to put one thing on the ballot. So we know there are groups out there that want to run initiatives. We wanted to try to take the approach to bring them to the table now and to, kind of hash out all of the pros and cons of things and hopefully have a good consensus going to the ballot. Part of this process, quite honestly, is meant to avoid differing ballot measures on the ballot in front of you.
And if I may add on to that, Dan, and folks who are participating, the reason why we have this process, albeit it's virtual now, right, is because we want to involve the public. These kind of conversations can take place, and say, hey, we're going to be in state violation of state law, perhaps. We're going to end up, potentially disenfranchising voters. We don't want to get there as we almost got there in 2019. Can we please, Councilman, can you pass this bill? Here's my recommendation. Can you put it on the ballot, right? Without engaging the public, right? So normally what we do is we want to make sure that there's transparency and public discourse. So that's what this is all about. So we want to hear from you. Questions?
Yep, thank you all. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to some of our Q&As here. And again, whoever wants to take this, feel free. So this is in regards to kind of our at-large races and how we do those. So question is, what about the at-large council contest? For approval voting with no runoff or currently plurality, it's easy. For ranked voting, would you use the multi-winner proportionality version of ranked choice voting, i.e. not an instant runoff? Maybe you, Dan?
Sure. That's the one that I know is when I think about it giving me trouble, that it is very simple right now with the at-larges. I think we have to dive into, if we were going to do ranked choice, how exactly that looks. I know there are multiple versions of ranked choice. At that point, we would probably work with more of the ranked choice experts and people who've done it before to make sure that we do it in the right way.
Yeah, that's the one race that's a little different, right? It's the top two vote getters. And the other races are all majority. I think, well, not all majority, but you will have runoffs in all the other races potentially if they don't reach the 50% plus one threshold.
I remember Kathy Reynolds, who served the longest in the at-large. She used to say she ran at-large because you only had to come in second to win.
That's true.
Now, Kathy did come in second in 1975, the first woman ever elected to Denver City Council. There was a second woman who was elected a month later in a runoff, Kathy Donahue. Excuse me. But Reynolds came in first in the succeeding 6 elections in which she ran at large. And you're right, that's the only race that we have that requires plurality, less than, just get the more votes than anyone else, or the top 2 vote getters. A possible approach would be to split them. You would run for one at-large position and run for another at-large position. You have to decide. There are people out in the community that have approached us earlier last year and then early this year who are actually discussing whether to eliminate Denver's at-large seats. We have a perfect opportunity this cycle because we have 2 at-large council members who are term limited and can't run again in 2023. Some council members have observed that with our population growth, the 11 district members are representing a very large number of people. And when we have redistricting with the census coming up, we have the intersection of the at-large member being limited and redistricting. It would be an opportunity to form 13 districts rather than having 11 districts and 2 at-large. There's precedent for this in the city of Los Angeles, much bigger than we are. They have 15 district members and no at-large. City of San Diego is the same. They have 9 city council members, all elected from districts and no at-large. So that's something we may be exploring also for the next cycle. And that would do away with the issue of how do we deal with electing 2 at-large members.
Brandy, and thank you, Councilman. Brandy, do we have more questions? Thank you.
Yeah, we sure do here. And just want to give just a quick reminder that so our survey that we've been mentioning, that actually closes on the 28th. However, our engagement team and the rest of the CRC committee will still be doing community engagement and outreach. So feel free to drop us a line at any time. The survey is also in Spanish as well. We did put a link in there if you want to share that out to our Spanish community. And let's see here. And we have a question, looks like here from Facebook, from Councilwoman Torres. And what does the national data reveal about plurality, approval, or ranked choice voting after a city adopts it? Does the voter turnout increase or decrease, or is there no change?
So I think, well, sorry, guys, if that's okay,
Go ahead.
take a stab. Approval, we just don't have enough information. I think only Fargo, North Dakota has done it so far. And they just reported that it was really easy to administer. It was a very brief email exchange with them, and much different than some of the ranked choice folks. I think a lot of this still comes down to, quite honestly,
I think he froze. So we'll wait till he kicks right back in. So there's not a lot of data that's out there, and you know, as we mentioned earlier, there are cities that are trying it out for the first time, cities that will be having the municipals doing it. New York just went to approval voting, I think in New York City as well too. So, you know, we are paying attention to a lot of that data that's coming out, Councilwoman. And the other thing too is, you know, there's a lot of different things that can drive turnout, right? A lot of different factors, and a lot of it has to do with also what's on the ballot, right? Typically when you kind of rank, when you rank elections, you know, things like presidential elections, and whoever the candidates are what drive folks to the ballot, right? The other thing with coordinated general elections, what issues, and again, what candidates are on the ballot as well too, usually drive that as well. And in municipal election, you know, you can have a highly contested mayoral election, or you just have, you know, one that's not as contentious, right? And then also the number of council members that run at any given time too, and if there's any specials as well. So there's a lot of different things that drive turnout. And I just want to reiterate, our whole philosophy is we want to make it easier regardless. We just want it easy for voters to vote, and we do our best to remove barriers and, you know, expand that access. So it looks like you're back on.
yeah, sorry about that. It's
No
the perils of virtual. But it sounds like you got to where I was going, which is to say we still think ballot content's a major driver, you know, being motivated by the ballot measure of the candidate. I don't think it's simple enough to just say that by the very method of voting, that alone changed it a certain number. A lot of this still comes down to ballot content.
Fantastic. So it looks like we just have a few more minutes here. We do have another question here in our Q&A. This is around ranked choice voting and extending the runoff time. And I'm not sure, Dan, if you had a chance to take a look at that in the Q&A, but I can go ahead and just read it out. A little lengthy, but I can go ahead and just read it out to folks here. So Minneapolis uses ranked choice voting in their 2017 mayoral election. The candidate who initially came in second place ended up falling to fourth place during the third round of the instant runoff. Turns out that the candidate that placed fourth and fifth place had votes split during the first round of voting. The candidate that initially came in fourth ended up being the second most popular candidate after the fifth place candidate was eliminated. In this situation, Denver would have paid for a runoff election with a candidate who was not actually popular. The fourth most popular candidate. How does extending the runoff timeframe fix that problem?
So extending the runoff timeframe is more so about our problem getting ballots out to voters and our administration problem. And that's really what we're trying to do. Now, obviously, if we have problems, the voters can have problems. But, you know, I think I would just kind of keep it back to, you know, we're thinking about this from administratively getting this out, ballots out to voters. I mean, the problem of having, you know, the person hop up after multiple rounds, I think is kind of where, and Councilman Flynn can probably chime in here, but you know, where some people actually get frustrated with RCV because it looks like people are jumping all around after a few rounds. But our extending the runoff time just gets us the ability to get ballots out.
And just for those out who are watching on Facebook or on the Zoom, we've asked the clerk's office to get some data for us on, excuse me, on other methods to conduct the runoff with the current schedule by looking at what other states and cities do, how they conform to the UOCAVA. I think at the last meeting I said UOVACA. I meant UOCAVA, the Overseas and Military Voters. How we can meet those by alternate voting methods only for those voters. I think the state of Mississippi held a statewide runoff in conformance with UOCAVA within 2 weeks a couple of years ago when Mike Espy was the candidate in the runoff who lost to Cindy Hyde-Smith. So there are ways to do it by keeping the current schedule as well. We need data on that. I'm not sure in the question, I'm not sure that that actually was a problem that the fourth place person was the second most popular person after you eliminated another candidate. The fact is that other candidate was in there. And so there are problems with every approach that we see and every approach that we examine. There are pros and there are cons to everything we're looking at. I just want folks to keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for maybe just one more quick question here. Just 1 second. Make sure I got it right here.
I did see oh, go ahead. No.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm not sure if we got to this one, but question is, will one decision be made for a vote on the ballot or could multiple options go to the ballot? Actually, I think we did answer that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think that was an earlier question here.
We did get a little bit of input about including, oh, I just saw a bunch of comments come in.
I just saw.
Lost my
yeah.
space. Yeah, Jackie Shumway. What's up, Jackie? I recognize that name. Had talked about perhaps including council district in terms of the in the survey. Now, the survey is kind of out there, so I don't know if we, and it's already been out there with the same questions. I don't know if you were asking if we include council district on the survey, because I think it's kind of been out there for a while. People have been chiming in, so. But I definitely got your question or your input. Yeah, can you include a link to the page where you can find out your city council district on the survey? I don't know if we can, I don't want to answer that because I'm terrible at adding links and stuff like that on my own. We have a team that does that, so I don't want to answer for them. Thank you for that. But for folks that are questioning where their council district is, just go to Denver City Council and you'll see the districts, or go to denvergov.org and there's a government city council and you'll see those districts in there.
Thank you. Dan, I'm going to pop this one to you for just our last question before we wrap up here, just in regards to giving us a brief overview of ranked choice voting. Question is, if we rank the candidates, are we saying who we want the most, or does that mean, or is that our top rank just get counted first? Top candidate just get counted first?
Yeah, so you would, I mean, we would go through the first round. So whoever you put in first, we would count all of those first rankings in the first round of tabulation. And if someone gets 50%, then we're done, right? Like someone got the majority and we're out of there. The way I understand the version of ranked choice voting that I understand is if Then if someone doesn't have the majority after the first round, the last place vote getter would be dropped out. And then all the people that voted for that candidate would then have their second choices go and be reallocated. And then you keep repeating that process until someone gets 50%. So essentially for some people, you're going to keep going down the chain of first, second, third preferences. If voters, your first preference is still holding in there and in the running, then that's going to hold.
Versus the approval voting, which is instead of you on your ballot seeing the candidates and says vote for one, you'd be able to vote for as many as you want, right? The folks that you would like, right? Instead of ranking them, you to say, oh, I like, for example, it was candy bars. I like M&Ms. I like Snickers. I like Kit Kat too, right? Whereas in ranked choice, you'd be like, I like Kit Kats more than M&Ms, but I like Snickers more than M&Ms too, right? So it's you kind of rank your choices. I did a terrible job with that, but still, I'm just hungry. I need a Kit Kat.
Thanks, guys. So I know I said one last question, but maybe the last question, maybe even in your wrap up, Clerk Lopez and Councilman Flynn. Questions came from Facebook. So they say a viewer says they're concerned about the actual voter. Is it difficult for them if we vary away from the typical general election process? Are we making it harder for them?
Well, that's where we want to hear from people, right? We don't want to make those decisions for everybody. Now we know, I mean, we're just off of a very high profile presidential election, and I am not a pessimist. I am an optimist, and I like the fact that we've had a 86% turnout. But there's a big part of me that's like, well, what happened to the 14%? I mean, for crying out loud, this was not a quiet election. Like a lot of people were stirred, right? There was something in there that should have got people to the ballot. However, it just depends. And there's education, and there's constant education on how to vote, instructions on how to vote, all that stuff, which we already do. And it's part of the reason why, I brought on an engagement team, is to get out there in every single zip code and every single nook and cranny, every council district, every neighborhood in the city, to make sure that we have that kind of outreach and access for folks to the ballot box, so they know what they're doing. They know how to know. We're not in the business to care, and we don't care who you vote for or how you affiliate. We just want you to be able to vote, and we want to remove those barriers to voting. With all models, with all changes, it's going to take education, right? Whether we move it or we have a completely different model, period, right? So that's what we're going to have to do, and we will continue to do that. So regardless.
Thank you, Clerk Lopez. I appreciate that. And so for folks that we weren't able to answer your questions, feel free to email us at charterclerk@denvergov.org. We'll be happy to follow up with questions and comments in that section. And I just want to give a shout out to our comms and engagement team for helping me get some of those questions and getting our whole Facebook Live streaming and Zoom up and running. So shout out to you guys. And just last remarks. I know we're a little over time, but just want to give last remarks. And Dan, big shout out to you as well. Thank you so much. But yeah, just want to give Councilman Flynn and Clerk Lopez just a few minutes to do some closing remarks, and then we'll head off.
Thank you, Brandy. I just want to thank the folks who've been on the meeting for their input and their questions, and keep exploring the issue. And we'll see you in November.
Councilman, thank you. And thank you, Councilman, for partnering up to do this. Listen, folks, Mile High City, we want to hear from you. We want to get your input. That's the whole purpose of having this, right? The one thing I'm going to say is Don't fill out more than one survey. Fill out one survey. We're in the business of one person, one vote, right? So, make sure that you help us, get the word out, forward this survey on to your communities. It's in the chat. Make sure that we want to hear from you. We want to get your input. Know that there's one thing I'm going to ask though. Inaction is not an option. We can't not do anything. 2023 it will be here in no time flat. Coming from my 12 years on the city council and now serving as your clerk and recorder, county and local government is everything. This is where representative government is where the tires meet the road, right? Some of the changes that you see happen quick, right? And happen. I'm putting myself on a limb when I say that because government is the speed of government is like the speed of a sloth, right? But I want to make sure that you that you know what we're facing, and the fact that we have two major conflicts that are there in regards to timing. Everybody matters. Every vote matters. Everybody's access to the ballot matters. Our job, my job as your clerk, is to make sure that everybody has that equal access. And so at the very minimum, we have to address the timing issue. But we are looking, and like I said, what you're seeing here is the discourse on how we can address those timing issues, right? But at the very minimum, please support, getting us out of the woods there, right? Something's going to be on the ballot. Let's make sure we continue to make sure that democracy is accessible to everybody.
All right, well, thank you, Clerk Lopez, and thank you all, those who participated. Thank you for the lively chat conversation that we have as well. So I hope everybody has a good night.
Oh,
thank you.
Brandy, shout out to you. Thank you for facilitating. Those of you who may recognize Brandy, as Brandy used to work as a city council aide, and she is awesome at what she does. So, Brandy, Danielle, and Celia, engagement, and shout out to our elections division folks. A national model isn't born overnight. It's hard work.
Yes, thank you. I second that, Clerk Lopez. It's great to see Brandy back here in Denver.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, guys. Everybody have a great night.
Take it easy, everybody.